But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried about housing, about GP appointments, about school places, and access to other public services when they can see their communities growing and growing quickly in numbers.
James Cleverly. Well, in response, the Shadow Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, said taxpayers have heard it all before.
How many times have we heard a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries stand up in the chamber of the House of Commons and tell us how much they're going to decrease migration by, only to see it soar in the following few months? Now, the figure that James Cleverly is talking about there, even if he manages to cut it by the amount that he's just said, and I doubt that, given their track record, even then, migration would be around double the level that it was in December 2019 when they told us they were going to cut it.
Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking as well today. He says a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. He was speaking in London earlier on this morning, and he pledged his ministers would be ruthless when it came to public spending. That's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate. He promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
The Prime Minister said today the BBC should be realistic about the licence fee increase. It's currently at £159 annually, but it's thought the corporation wants to hike the charge by as much as 9% next year. That would make it £14 more every month. The Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, says the planned rise would be very high amid cost of living pressures, and GB News understands the broadcaster could be forced to accept a lower increase. Almost £17 billion is missing from the government's military budget. That's according to the National Audit Office, which has called the government's plans to purchase new weapons over the next decade as unaffordable. It's due to costs rising by 27%, outstripping a budget increase of more than £46 billion. The government says it is committed to increasing defence spending. The north of England is set to get extra money to improve rail services. Ministers are promising to invest almost £4 billion to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route connecting Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. That's after the Prime Minister scrapped the northern leg of HS2 between Manchester and Birmingham earlier on this year. And nearly 30 flood warnings have been issued as the risk of snow subsides. It follows a night of sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfall, particularly in the north, with nearly 40 schools closed today in Cumbria in the Lake District. The yellow rain alert remains in place, though, for North East England, and the ice warning covers the whole of Scotland until tomorrow morning. That's just about it from the GB Newsroom. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, and also the journalist and broadcaster, Ella Whelan. Good evening to both of you. You know the drill as well, don't you, on this programme? It's not just about us three here. It's very much about you guys at home. What is on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet me at GB News. I've got a lot coming up on the programme tonight. I want to talk licence fees. stories. I want to talk about Harry and Meghan's royal titles, whether or not it's a good use of parliamentary time to be debating that or not. Also, Keir Starmer and the economy. And, of course, the big news of the day, James Cleverly. Nigel Farage is not up next after me, in case you've not... Well, I don't know where you've been, quite frankly, if you don't know where he is, but he is still in Australia. Don't forget, we're asking all of you, any of you that are interested in this topic and or Nigel, let's turn out and vote for him to remain in the jungle. If you don't know what to do, worry not. We've made it simple for you. Get your phone out, take a picture of that black squidgy mess on the corner of the screen, and it'll tell you what to do next. Let's make him the king of the jungle, King Nigel. What is not to love about that? Anyway, let's get stuck in, shall we, to our top story today, because the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has unveiled his 5-point plan. Makes me laugh because I think there are so many 5-point plans now. They're a bit ludicrous, aren't they? But anyway, that he has got a plan. He is putting some numbers behind it. Let's cross live to Westminster to get stuck into all of that details with our political editor, Christopher Herb. Christopher, good evening to you. Bring the viewers who've just tuned in up to speed. What's gone on today with Cleverly?
OK, what's happened today is the government has taken action to deal with net migration. That's the number of migrants who arrive here legally through our border gates in the south coast of England or through our airports. We know that in the 12 months to June this year, 672,000 net people arrived here, more than left. That's the net figure. Now, the measures to bring that down, announced by the government today, a 5-point plan from James Cleverly, including stopping care workers bringing in family dependents, and increasing the skilled worker earning threshold to get a visa by a third to 38,700, doing something similar with the minimum income for a family, lifting that from 18,000 to 38,000. What they're trying to do is bring in more skilled migrants. Essentially, they're reverting to where they were before 2016. Basically, it's a graduate-only visa if you want to come here. Well, they're trying to eat into this overall number of 672,000 who arrived here in the year to June, as I said. These measures announced today by James Cleverly should bring that number down by 300,000. But that still means that the government net figure they're happy to have coming in every year more than leave is 372,000 people. Now, that's a long way from the figure back in 2019 at the election, when the government said it would bring down net migration below the 219,000 a year level then. It's a big factor more than that. If you take the numbers arrived in the year to the end of December last year, that was 145,000, but that was swelled by the Ukraine war. If you take off 300,000 off that, it's 445,000. These are big numbers, Michelle, of those who are being allowed to come here legally through the government's existing policy. Is that what people voted for to control back in 2016? The big debate right now for Tory MPs, Tories and Labour and all voters is, what level of net migration are you happy with? The government now is happy with 372,000 people arriving more than are leaving. Is that a number we can sustain? Because the number of new homes being built is not that much. Is that enough? Is that a number which worries people, worrying about GP surgery provision or school places, or can they get a council house? A minority of those are going to work, others aren't. The big challenge the government has got is there are 1 million vacancies right now in the labour market. There's 6 million adults who are at home who can work and aren't working. The government's trying to stop the flow or slow the flow of foreign labour arriving in this country to get those people who aren't working back into work. It's back to British jobs for British workers. We saw that, didn't we, in the 2000s? But will it work? That's the question. There's a reaction immediately from Suella Braverman. She's a former Home Secretary, of course, who was fired by Rishi Sunak, who was sacked. She said she welcomes it, but she worries that the government can go further, because this salary threshold will only kick in spring 2024, so the figures won't emerge until 2025, after the next general election. So this government will have gone through 5 years nowhere near hitting its net migration target. Essentially, they've ripped up their manifesto commitment from 2019. The one thing going, I think, for the Tory government is Labour haven't got an answer. They are nowhere near on this. I think the benefit of this kind of announcement today will probably be Nigel Farage, as you say, still in a jungle. But his Reform Party, I think, might see more people going towards that, because this, I think, won't be enough for many people.
Yeah, and just a quick area of clarification. The number that we're talking about here, just to be clear, this excludes the people that are crossing the channel, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. This only deals with net legal migration. Separate to all that, Michelle, later this week we'll see government measures to try and stop the boats, to stop these crossings over the south coast, running at around 23,000 so far this year. This weekend, the figure for 2021 was beaten this year. It's down by a third. The government's done well on that because of a deal with Albania. There's more cooperation with the French authorities, but still we are now running at more than we were in 2021. It's about 23,000. We'll see a treaty agreed probably this week by James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, with the government in Rwanda, and that will mean that the idea is the government can try and take some of the people who arrive here by small boats to Rwanda, process their details there, and then allow them to settle somewhere else, but not in the UK. But the agreement they've got going, which they'll sign, is to ensure that people are not sent back to the country they're fleeing from to put them at risk. I think also the Cabinet will meet tomorrow to work out whether they can disapply human rights in some situation for those who are leaving this country by going back to Rwanda, because currently human rights laws mean it's very hard to do so.
Indeed. Christopher Hope, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed. Ben Habib, are you sitting there as a man that's happy tonight going, yes, James Cleverly's fixed it all?
Well, he clearly hasn't fixed it all, because by their own assessment, the numbers are only going to reduce by 300,000. But the first thing I want to say is that somehow the government has got us all talking about net migration.
Yes.
We've taken our eye completely off the gross numbers coming into the country. And this, in the latest figures that were released, 1.2 million people came to the United Kingdom. Last year, 1.1 million people. And the year before that, 700,000. So you're talking about 3.5 million people have emigrated from their countries into the United Kingdom. That's 5% of our population has changed. And what we've lost, of course, is British citizens who were working in the United Kingdom. And we don't have anything more than anecdotal evidence for it, but you can bet your bottom dollar the people we've lost are people who've got fed up with the inability to make a proper living in the UK, have aspirations, want to go abroad where the tax regime and regulatory regime is better for them and their businesses. And that's what we're doing with the migration issue. We're actually hollowing out our own workforce. And Christopher Hope touched on it when he talked about the 6 million people who are on universal credit at the moment. That figure, like migration, has doubled since 2019. It was 3 million people on universal credit since then. So you've got 6 million people, to some extent, significant extent, economically inactive in the UK. And what we haven't seen from this government is what I would call a joined-up approach. You've got to promote people into the workforce at the same time as you reduce migration.
Indeed. Ella, your thoughts?
I am disappointed by this announcement, probably for a different reason. In fact, I'm sort of a bit shocked at the whole kind of British jobs, British workers slogan being used so in such a cavalier fashion again, because to me that always signified something particularly reactionary in politics from the early 2000s, and I'm depressed that it's come back around again. I think when governments are in tight spots, and this one is in an extremely tight spot, failing left, right and centre, too often they decide to try and make a victory out of passing the buck of their failures to immigrants. And I think that what James Cleverly and the government is trying to do at the moment is pretend like if we shut the doors and kick a load of people on universal credit back into work, that everything will be rosy. I mean, there is the fact that we have such high levels of migration are down to failures in, take, for example, the situation around social care. Huge amount of the people working in that are migrants. It's reliant on migrant work. In the autumn budget, you had absolutely, I think, pretty much no mention of anything in relation to social care. That is a part of life that the government
We had an increase in the minimum wage.
Well, the government doesn't seem to care about that sector. I mean, you have to have, if neither the Conservatives nor, as we found out today from Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, are interested in growing the economy to provide more resources for people, to do something to make us have more houses, more, GP surgeries, whatever it is, have more in our lives. What they do to try and get out of that failure is to say, we'll fix this by kicking a load of people out or shutting the doors.
But are you content, Ella, with the level of migration into the UK? Are you content with these numbers?
I think that the interesting thing is that if you ask people why they're not content with it, they say it's because I can't get a GP appointment, I can't get a house. All legitimate, true things.
Yeah.
The answer for me to that isn't to reduce immigration levels, but to build more houses, to create more jobs, to grow the economy.
So my question is, are you content with the level of migration into this country? Are you content with the population changing at the rate of 5% every 3 years?
I'm not bothered by the numbers, in actual fact. It's not a problem for me, because I think the problem is a lack of resources, not too many people. I think we've just got this all twisted around the wrong way, as if there's less of us, then we'll have more of this measly little cake of resources that the government has provided to share out between us. When in actual fact, I think we should be demanding more.
But why do you look to the government to provide resources for the economy to grow? What we need surely is...
Well, I can't do it and you can't do it, but it has to be
private sector. It's the private sector that's going to grow the economy.
So what you said, what discussions about growth or the productivity in this country has got nothing to do with politicians.
So if you cut back migration, you cut back tax on the working and middle classes, you cut back tax on businesses, you deregulate the regulations to which businesses and private sector are subject, they will automatically start employing more British people. Growth will automatically take place. The Exchequer will collect more tax. That's the principle.
I think you're sorely mistaken in thinking that all of our problems in relation to the economy come down to a tinkering around with tax. It's much bigger issue.
We're going to, in a second after the break...
I'm not talking about tinkering, I'm talking about slashing. It is over the top.
We're going to focus on the economy in just a second. But let me ask you this. When you're saying we can just build more houses, build more this, that and the other... is there a part of you that actually sits there and thinks, actually, the size of an island is a finite thing? There's only so much space to be building all this stuff on, only so much room for whatever it is, whether it's schools or whatever. Is there a concern that if we keep overpopulating at this rate, where are you putting all these things?
It's a total myth that we're overpopulated. I mean, the amount of just sort of like physical land that is developed upon in this country is a lot smaller than is made out to be.
But Ella, do you appreciate...
Hang on, let me finish.
Yeah.
We should be doing things, exciting things like, building new towns, new cities, think of things like Milton Keynes, in order to provide resources for people who are already living here and also people that might need or want to come here.
But building a new Milton Keynes costs money. I mean,
which is why we need a booming economy.
Yeah, and which is why you need the private sector firing on all cylinders, which is why you need British people working.
Which
the level
is why...
of migration, let me just say, migration is a Ponzi scheme. Getting in cheap labour in order to fill gaps in the British work market, which we can't fulfil, is a Ponzi scheme because these people get older, they need health services, they need houses, they need pensions, and you take in more people. And it's a Ponzi scheme out of which you can't escape unless you hit the problem squarely on the head.
Well, there you go. There's another problem we need to hit squarely on the head. It's the one that these two have alluded to already, which is the situation in the economy. Keir Starmer's been speaking out today about how he is going to fix the future of the economy. We'll come back to this debate and focus on Keir Starmer after the break.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GBNews.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry till 7 o'clock. Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, alongside me as is journalist and broadcaster Ella Whelan. We've just been talking about migration. Tina says, why are you not asking? Why are all these plans not implemented tomorrow? Why are we waiting until the spring? I think that's an interesting point. Ben is nodding along, I think, in agreement with you. Lee says this is always the same story over and over again. They say all these things and ultimately nothing happens. Do the government want to get voted out? Asked Tory. I'll never vote Tory ever again, he says. 400,000 migrants there or thereabouts is an absolute joke, he says. Nigel again echoes that, says, what an absolute joke. The number should be 50,000 with no family members at all. Many of you as well saying, why don't we just close, Mark says, close all migration for a decade and go from there. Claire again echoing, why are we waiting till the spring for these changes? Why wouldn't you start it now if indeed enough is enough? Anyway, Sir Keir Starmer, he has been speaking out today, focused, of course, on the economy and how we can grow it. Let's have a listen to some of the things he had to say.
What my parents felt in the 1970s was that whilst day-to-day life was often tough, the future would be a happier place. Britain would be better for your children. Hard work in the end, in the long run, would be rewarded. And that was actually a comfort to them, a security blanket, if you like. But one which for working people in Britain now, sadly, no longer exists.
Ben Habib let out like what I would describe as like a chortle during that. Why?
Well, I mean, he's talking about growing the economy. Keir Starmer is completely wed to the European Union. The European Union's economic model is what I would call progressive socialism. Big state intervention, in their case from the European Union, and indeed member state governments, big state intervention, big spending, massive taxes. That's exactly the same model that we've been practicing in the UK for the last 25 years since Tony Blair became Prime Minister. He nearly busted the country in 2008. This lot have busted it again. That model doesn't work. The pendulum has swung far too far over towards state intervention, state spending, state largesse. The nanny state's gone to being a wet nurse rather than being a nanny state, and private enterprise is being crushed. People, The working and middle classes have been crushed. Aspiration has been replaced by dependency. Wealth creation has been replaced by wealth redistribution. And that is what Keir Starmer stands for. When he says he's going to grow the economy, all he's going to do is more of the same that's been done for the last 25 years. There's nothing new in what he says. And we know that for sure because he said in Montreal a few weeks ago that his approach to the EU would be to mimic their regulatory framework so that we are very close to the EU. He wouldn't do anything to champion British national interests. So we're wed to that model. We're not getting out of it. You vote Tory, you get Labour. You vote Labour, you get Labour.
I'll come back to you on that in a sec, but Ella, your thoughts?
I think it's incredibly depressing that he has, in a sort of pre-election bid, admitted defeat in the economy, which is basically saying we're going to have, by other means, and maybe call it another word, austerity. There's not going to be any. He's said, if you think that, I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, if you think that the Labour Party is going to break out open the purse strings, you're wrong. That
The purse strings are already wide open.
Well, but I mean, but if you take your average person's daily interaction with public services, whatever they are, they're falling apart at the seams. They're obviously a discussion about the NHS. Everybody admits the NHS needs more money. Everybody admits that the NHS can't spend the money well. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a kid in the NHS, and I'll tell you what it's like. It definitely does need more funding, more staff, but it spends the money very, very badly. So there's a mishandling of public services, but there's also a fact that a lot of them have been run down over the last few years. Now, that happened throughout the Labour government. It's happened worse with the Conservative government. But the announcement from an opposition leader of basically saying things aren't going to, if they change, it won't change for the better, is essentially what he's saying. And he's blaming it on the Conservatives by saying we're inheriting a terrible situation. I mean, it's an incredibly depressing prospect for voters going into a ballot box. We've just had a row about immigration.
Obviously, we had a debate.
A debate about immigration.
Robust debate.
But the kind of underneath all of these sort of discussions is about how people interact in their daily lives with their quality of life, what kind of resources they can have, what sort of, as he says, what future they might have for their kids. And most people looking today can see nothing but bleak.
But you talk about resources, Ella. You repeatedly talk about whose resources? Where does this resource come from? There's only one mechanism by which the United Kingdom can accrue resource, and that is through individuals working hard, making money, and saving their money. The private sector has been decimated. Most jobs in this country now come either directly or indirectly from the public sector. There's been no shortage of spending.
I think that I think it's interesting that you seem to believe that that we have it's the kind of the Trussian idea that we have this sort of bunch of ready-to-go capitalists who have just been strangled by whatever it is, regulation or taxation or, rates, and if we just let them loose, they will bust out and make us some money. I actually think that the private sector and, that it's a lot more, whether it's sluggish or cowardly, mired in, the kind of woke capitalism stuff, mired in green politics. There is not that sort of dynamism within the private sector.
Clearly,
and so you're as much wishful thinking as anyone else.
There's no motivation for that dynamism, because if you open up a business, you pay a higher corporation tax rate in this country than across Europe. If you employ people, you pay a much higher tax rate, or those people pay a much higher tax rate than they do in many other parts of Europe now. There is no motivation, and that's why I say aspiration has been replaced with dependency. Resource cannot come from the government. Yeah. It has to come from within the people of this country.
I completely agree with you in relation to making it easier and more accessible for startups or whatever, or anything kind of business, to do something big and exciting and make investment. And all of that is absolutely fine. Yeah. But the idea that has to be in sort of in a war with cutting public services or taking the eye off
I'm not talking about cutting public services.
Is a nonsense.
I'm not talking about cutting public services. Public services, by the way, have had a lot of money spent on them. As you rightly indicated, the problem with our public services is they've been grossly mismanaged. And one of the other issues here, you touched on it as well, which I'm glad you did, is this inexorable drive to net zero. That is putting a massive cost burden on the entire economy, every individual in this country. The government doesn't tell tell the truth about it. By Theresa May's own assessment, the drive to net zero is 1.4 trillion. Some people now put the cost at 3 trillion.
Yeah.
We can't afford it. We need to pare back all this nonsense. We need to deregulate, cut taxes on business, cut taxes on working and middle classes, and rocket propel the economy. We've got to instill aspiration again.
Well,
it's gone.
There we agree on net zero. I wouldn't say pare it back. I'd say scrap it entirely.
Scrap it.
And it is telling that in Keir Starmer's speech and everything the Labour Party's put out, in the background is this sort of lie within their sort of narrative, which is the idea that you can push forward with green austerity and blame it on the Conservatives or blame it on something else. They are baking into their plans a reduction of living standards through green.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, we're talking about entrepreneurialism. Keir Starmer, he has come under fire because at the weekend he did an article in The Telegraph, and I don't know if I've got the front page of the Daily Mirror to show you today, but people are outraged because basically he praised in some way Margaret Thatcher for what he would say setting loose basically the entrepreneurialism in this country. The Daily Mirror says Thatcher backlash hits Starmer. That's their front page there. People are livid that he said that.
Well, I mean, I mean, all I can say is that at best I describe that as political opportunism. At worst, I think he's a liar because he clearly does not believe in Thatcherite policies. He doesn't believe in democratising the earning of money, which is, you know, cutting taxes so you can keep what you earn. He doesn't believe in that. He believes in a large state. Look at his mentor, Tony Blair, sitting in the background. Tony Blair's approach was state intervention, state intervention, state intervention. Why do we have ESG? Tony Blair laid the foundations for it. Why do we have diversity, equality and inclusion? Tony Blair laid the foundations for it. Why do we have open borders? Tony Blair opened the borders. All of this, all of the yardsticks by which Keir Starmer is going to create policy come from Tony Blair. Tony Blair should be nowhere near governance.
Well, Tony Blair's doing very well at the moment with his institute. I can't help but notice. Anyway, Ella, was he wrong to praise Thatcher?
Well, no, there's a lot of failed politicians who are doing very well these days, but in the Lords and elsewhere. But
that's true.
I actually am less surprised about the Thatcher sort of flag waving, because I think the thing aside from sort of economic policy, the thing about Thatcher was that she was a particular kind of conservative that had no interest in the power in working class politics and democratic engagement in politics, and obviously her history in relating with the working class is one that speaks for himself. Tony Blair came along and in a similar vein through ESG, you know, the prime before of ESG and the idea that a government should tell people what to think, tell people what to do.
Absolutely.
Had a similar disinterest in the power of the working class and the power of the masses and democracy and all the rest of it. And Keir Starmer fits neatly into that line. You know, the idea that I would say, he is far closer to Thatcher than he is in relation to anything. You used the word socialism earlier. Far closer to Thatcher than he is to that. He's a dull, centrist sort of Labour Blairite who, and I'm afraid that with the Conservative Party is moving inwards, the Labour Party is moving inwards, and you couldn't fit a cigarette paper between the two of them. And this next election
agree with that.
Is going to be dull as dull.
Well, it won't be, because we will have Reform UK.
We will have Reform UK. We'll be covering it all. It won't be boring. And yeah, actually, that whole conversation about Reform UK and its role, potential role in the next election is a fascinating one. And also, I'm finding it quite interesting the whole conversation about whether or not Nigel Farage should be back in the Tories. I find that interesting as well, what you make to it all. Anyway, this ESG that we keep referring to, in case you're not familiar with it, is it environmental, social and governance? Is that what it stands for, ESG? It does, doesn't it? It's all about basically like all of your like diversity stuff, all your quotas and all your net zero, just in case you're not familiar with that. Some would say it's the root of many problems in this country. Others would say it is absolutely a force for good. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll be bringing you guys into the conversation, but also I'm asking, do you think it is a good use of Parliament's time to be debating whether or not Harry and Meghan should have their royal titles? You tell me.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Ben Habib, Deputy Leader Reform UK, alongside me, as is the journalist and broadcaster Ella Whelan. Lots of you guys getting in touch. Jennifer says, Michelle, you're talking about the NHS. They've pumped so much money into the NHS. It's not working. She says it needs totally reorganising, and we say this as a medical family. Someone else, Bob, says, Michelle, how many of these people on universal credit are not able to work because they cannot access, get treatment on the NHS? One of my other viewers, I've just forgot your name, sorry, I've scrolled past it, says that the Reform Party would be a nightmare for British politics. She says because you want to bring in proportional representation, and she said that that will create carnage in this country because you won't have majority governments.
What? Because First Past the Post has produced such great government for the last 25 years. Look at the. Well, I can't use the language that comes into my head. I mean, First Past the Post has been a disaster. 80-seat majority Boris Johnson had, and what's he done? It's wasted it completely.
Well, there you go. Andy says, Michelle, please can GB News talk more about migration? It doesn't cover it enough. Sarcastically yours, Andy. He says, Andy, I can tell you now, migration in this country, the number, net migration, etc., is a problem, or is a situation that is at the root of many problems. Many people would say, whether it's access to housing, you can't just keep increasing a population, surely, without having a knock-on effect on pretty much every aspect of society. That's what I would say in response to that. But anyway, the Conservative MP Bob Seeley, he has said he wants to pass a bill in Parliament that would strip the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of their titles. Many people will have a strong view as to whether or not these people should have royal titles in the first place, but notwithstanding that, so you can share your view on that if you want, but do you think this is a good use of parliamentary time, Ben?
So I indulged in a bit of Harry and Meghan chat yesterday, I think, on GB News, and all the social media feedback I got was, why are you wasting time on Harry and Meghan? And I agree with the social media feedback. I can't bear chatting about Harry and Meghan. I just see two self-entitled, self-indulgent, whinging snowflake millennials, and I wish they'd just get off our screen, go to the States and leave us alone.
So hence my question. So do you think it's what Parliament should be doing?
No. I mean, I couldn't care. They can do it or not do it. It seems like a waste. Any attention given to Harry and Meghan is attention wasted.
Hello?
Well, I'm going to completely agree with that, but with an extra bit, which is that I think it's interesting. I think the Harry and Meghan sort of celebritisation of the royal family has been interesting because, and actually, in many ways, other members of the royal family with their sort of but taking a more interventionist approach in public life and political life than they would previously. The tie incident being a great example of that, with King Charles and the Greek tie. This sort of like courting public opinion, which, you know, obviously the late Queen never did, I think opens up interesting discussions about the role of the royal family, the future of the royal family, and, you know, someone as, you know, a Republican like me might say, I'm not sure I should waste parliamentary time on it, but maybe, you know, a bigger discussion about whether or not this family, as sort of soap opera-esque as they seem to be moving towards, actually is worth it, is something I do want to talk about.
Jeff says, good evening, everyone. It's time the royal family was disbanded, as no single family should have so much privilege, land and luxury off the backs of the poor, pensioners and taxpayers in this country. John says, discussing this in Parliament, given everything that's going on in society, is somebody having a laugh? Steve says, I don't mind a quick chat in Parliament if it means Harry and Meghan are stripped of their titles. Something tells me I don't think it'd be a quick chat. Just to be clear on this is the bill would be the Titles Deprivation 1917 Act Amendment Bill. It would allow a vote in Parliament to advise the Privy Council to strip a member of the royal family of their titles. If passed, it would adapt laws originally passed in the First World War to strip enemy German nobles of their British titles. I mean, to your point, I'm not sure that people actually care about this topic, Ben, enough, do they?
I don't think they care. I think people are fed up with Harry and Meghan. And I can't think of two luckier people in the world. They've got all the wealth that any couple could possibly want. They've got lovely children. They can jet set around, and yet all they do is complain. I just want to see less of them, or none of them, frankly.
Yeah, well, Dee says, to be honest, Michelle, those titles should have been stripped a very long time ago. All they do is seek to monetise their titles whilst bashing their family. Lots of you getting in touch as well. Still about that immigration topic, Alison is saying that big business is profiteering from all of the uncontrolled immigration, leaving carers, etc., stuck on minimum wages. I've asked this question many times. Why do we value caring so little in this country that we do pay those people minimum wage? Surely it's one of the best, most important, most valuable jobs we can do in this country, to care and make healthy and safe and well another individual, isn't it? You tell me. Anyway, look, I want to talk to you about a topic that I know will get you guys talking, the BBC licence fee. Of course, we don't know by now how much it's going to increase by. What is your amount? What would you be happy with? £15 has been floated as a figure. Would that work for you guys? Do we need the licence fee at all? Your thoughts?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion.
Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewbs, 7, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, and journalist broadcaster Ella Whelan alongside me. Let's talk the BBC licence fee, shall we? Because it was expected to rise by £15 in April. That would have taken it to £173.30p. But a few people have been speaking out on this. Rishi Sunak being one, the Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser being another, basically saying that it is too high. Never mind it being too high, actually. I think the remit of it is quite broad because this is not all about whether or not you just watch the BBC. So the licence fee basically covers you if you want to watch any streaming service live. So, for example, it will be like a YouTube if you want to watch YouTube live. If you want to watch us, well, I say us, but any channel, quite frankly, on a streaming service, whether that's, say, Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. Ben Habib, where are you on the licence fee?
Well, I think the BBC should have all its licence fee income cancelled. I can't see a justification for it. It's effectively a taxation on the British people, and if it's going to be a taxation on the British people, the BBC should be providing a public service. And I don't think the BBC provides anything beyond any other news channel or any other channel for that matter. I often find myself watching GB News to find out what's going on in the world, a much broader perspective than what BBC has, which increasingly pumps its own ideology on the climate, its own ideology on immigration, its own ideology on Brexit, or its anti-position on Brexit. I mean, I can't see what the public service provision of the BBC is. And absent a public service provision, it should have its income from the public abolished. And so it should just go. And frankly, I don't care if the BBC goes bust. So what? No one's going to miss it. Stop the income instantly. Why would we miss it? We wouldn't miss a thing if the BBC went bust.
Would you miss a thing if it went bust, Ella?
I would. I'm a big fan of the BBC.
OK.
I agree on the licence fee. I think that it is... I think we just don't talk enough that, you know, people go to jail, get prosecuted for not paying the licence fee. And it's mainly women. It's mainly older women.
It is.
I mean,
go to jail.
I mean, yeah, it would be bad if it was men. But, I mean, it's just this obvious problem that nobody who's a supporter of the BBC generally talks about. So I would scrap the fee. And I think that the strength of the BBC would stand on a sort of subscription basis. I mean, at the moment, the sort of tenor of a lot of BBC output can be grating, it can be irritating, can have its biases, and I would agree with you. You know, as a Brexiteer, listening to Radio 4 and all the rest of it throughout the 2016, 2017, 2018 years was painful. It was painful a lot of the time.
What public service do you think it provides?
I think that there's, you know, in terms of its arts programming, it is, I think, a lot of the time unmatched. I think some of the BBC archive is just wonderful television, wonderful entertainment. Some of the, you know, dramas and series it's put on over the years have been fantastic. I think it's still the best for international reporting. I'm pretty much co-parenting with CBeebies at this point. You know, all of that, I think, means that if we move to a subscription model like Netflix or whatever, that people would pay for it. I think that at the moment you're sort of being held by your sort of collar, forced to pay for something that a lot of people think isn't value for money. And the world has changed. You know, we are in a world in which particularly young people, which everyone seems obsessed with in this realm of TV and media, don't watch telly. Most young people don't have televisions. They do everything on their laptop, it's on demand and all the rest of it. So I think it's probably time for the BBC to get with the times, and certainly not to be as brazen as trying to increase the fee by, as reported, allegedly, as much as 9%.
1.5 times the rate of current inflation. That's massive.
Steve, you've got the wrong end of the stick here, fella, because Steve is saying £15 sounds not a bad amount to me, but they're not saying about charging you £15. Talking about that would be the incremental cost to the licence fee. And we talk about prosecutions. I must confess, I don't know how many people are sent to jail, but apparently about 1,000 people every week are prosecuted for failing to pay their TV licence. Apparently this makes it the most common crime in the country outside of murdering offences. About 70% of those people that receive those fines are women. And licence fee evasion now accounts for around a fifth of all criminal prosecutions made against women. I found that actually quite interesting. If you refuse to pay your television licence, you can get a criminal record, and the details can show up on an enhanced DBS check as well. And I do just need to stress this, because even if you want to watch GB News, which thank you and high five for doing so, if you watch it live, for example, just on YouTube, you still have to have a licence fee for that. I've got to say that feels a little bit peculiar to me in terms of fairness. Maybe you guys will agree with that. Alan says it's basically a tax, and it should go. It's a throwback to the beginning of TV and radio when there were only 1 or 2 channels to watch. Again, lots of people, Mark says it's about time it was switched to a paid subscription. You're saying I don't want the BBC on my TV, but as I've said, it's not just about the BBC and it's not just about television either. Karen says you could halve the licence fee and stop paying the likes of Lineker his absolutely massive salaries. That is a good point, though, isn't it? I mean, what is public service about paying someone £1 million plus to talk about football?
I mean, obviously, fees in television can be eye-watering, and that's, you know, what can you do about that? But there are some particularly when the sort of pay gap row was happening in the BBC, I found it hard to stomach when 2 people were rowing over who had 400,000 and who had 300,000. So there's definitely a sort of that just doesn't work with people at home. But the other thing I wanted to mention about the licence fee is I think that it's interesting that supporters of the BBC say if you remove the licence fee, then you wouldn't have any of the sort of educational output, arts output or anything like that, because people just, and this sort of assumption is people just want trash telly. No one wants the highbrow stuff.
But can we ban the BBC from doing anything other than art then, or educational? You know, just ban them from all the other bits.
No, but so the point I'm making is that there's this suggestion that viewers just want trash telly and trash telly sells, and that all the other stuff, the nice highbrow stuff that the BBC does, would be lost. I actually think that people are much more complex in their viewing tastes, and if you go by some of the, you know, the interest in some of the stuff that sort of European television that's come out recently, and crime dramas and things like that, people have varied interests, and I think a subscription model could work.
Steve says you should make them use advertisers for their money. They would then be no different from a commercial station, he says. Make it a level playing field for all. Who's this? Nigel says he can't believe that you wouldn't miss the World Service. And by the way, you say, what public service has the BBC ever done? What has it given the public? Well, hello, what about me? I'm a product of the BBC.
Yeah, but you've now graduated.
It gave the public me, everybody. How would you be able to live, Ben Habib, without me? Anyway, I shall let you guys ponder what you'd be happy to pay for the BBC licence, what that should be going forward. But for now, that's all I've got time for. Ella Whelan, thank you for your company. Ben Habib, thanks for yours. Guys, have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been a bit of a grim day for many parts of the UK. The rain eases over the next 24 hours, only gradually, however, and then clearer and colder weather returns to the UK, albeit briefly, before further areas of low pressure come our way later this week. So the first area of low pressure is clearing. It's clearing to the southeast. Wrapped around it, a number of occluded fronts. That means bands of rain continuing for southern Scotland, northern England, into the Midlands, parts of Wales and the southwest, also seeing a number of showers overnight. But the more persistent rain is gradually easing. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees quite low temperatures overnight. Temperatures down to -5 Celsius in places, and with some showers feeding in overnight as well. There'll be a few slippery surfaces first thing on Tuesday to watch out for. But that's where the brightest weather will be, and that brighter weather will spread into southern Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, western England and Wales by the afternoon. Central and eastern England still subject to outbreaks of rain or showers even into the afternoon, and staying cool here with the breeze from the North Sea. But then the rain clears widely and an overnight frost returns to many places by the start of Wednesday. Some freezing fog patches as well, but actually it's a bright day for many in the east, with wetter weather returning by the afternoon into the west. That wet weather turns to snow over northern hills overnight, but milder conditions return to all later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top